Preface of the Hoosier Schoolmaster. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Bridget Gaige. The Hoosier Schoolmaster by Edward Eggleston. Preface to the Library Edition. Being the history of a story. The Hoosier Schoolmaster was written and printed in the autumn of 1871. It is therefore now about 21 years old, and the publishers propose to mark its coming of age by issuing a library edition. I avail myself of the occasion to make some needed revisions, and to preface the new edition with an account of the origin and adventures of the book. If I should seem to betray unbecoming pride in speaking of a story that has passed into several languages and maintained an undiminished popularity for more than a score of years, I count on receiving the indulgence commonly granted to paternal vanity when celebrating the majority of a firstborn. With all its faults on its head, this little tale has become a classic, in the bookseller's sense at least, and a public that has shown so constant a partiality for it has a right to feel some curiosity regarding its history. I persuade myself that additional extenuation for this biography of a book is to be found in the relation which the Hoosier Schoolmaster happens to bear to the most significant movement in American literature in our generation. It is the file leader of the procession of American dialect novels. Before the appearance of this story, the New England folk speech had long been employed for various literary purposes, it is true, and after its use by Lowell, it had acquired a standing that made it the classic lingua rustica of the United States. Even Hoosiers and Southerners, when put into print, as they sometimes were in rude burlesque stories, usually talked about huskin' bees and apple-parin' bees, and used many other expressions foreign to their vernacular. American literature hardly touched the speech and life of the people outside of New England. In other words, it was provincial in the narrow sense. I can hardly suppose that the Hoosier Schoolmaster bore any causative relation to that broader provincial movement in our literature which now includes such remarkable productions as the writings of Mr. Cable, Mr. Harris, Mr. Page, Miss Murfree, Mr. Richard Malcolm Johnson, Mr. Howe, Mr. Garland, some of Mrs. Burnett's stories, and others quite worthy of inclusion in this list. The taking up of life in this regional way has made our literature really national by the only process possible. The federal nation has at length manifested a consciousness of the continental diversity of its forms of life. The great American novel, for which prophetic critics yearned so fondly 20 years ago, is appearing in sections. I may claim for this book the distinction, such as it is, of being the first of the dialect stories that depict a life quite beyond New England influence. Some of Mr. Bret Harte's brief and powerful tales had already foreshadowed this movement toward a larger rendering of our life, but the romantic character of Mr. Harte's delightful stories, and the absence of anything that can justly be called dialect in them, mark them as rather forerunners than beginners of the prevailing school. For some years after the appearance of the present novel, my own stories had to themselves the field of provincial realism, if indeed there be any such thing as realism, before there came the succession of fine productions which have made the last 14 years notable. Though it had often occurred to me to write something in the dialect now known as Hoosier, the folk speech of the southern part of Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois of 40 years ago, I had postponed the attempt indefinitely, probably because the only literary use that had been made of the allied speech of the Southwest had been in the books of the primitive humorists of that region. I found it hard to disassociate in my own mind the dialect from the somewhat coarse boisterousness which seemed inseparable from it in the works of these rollicking writers. It chanced that in 1871 Taine's lectures on art in the Netherlands, or rather Mr. John Durand's translation of them, fell into my hands as a book for editorial review. These discourses are little else than an elucidation of the thesis that the artist of originality will work courageously with the materials he finds in his own environment. In Taine's view, all life has matter for the artist, if only he have eyes to see. Many years previous to the time of which I am now speaking, while I was yet a young man, I had projected a lecture on the Hoosier folk speech, and
Sample complete. Ready to continue?